Hello and welcome to Book Lovers Companion, the podcast about books, authors, their craft, and more. My name is Edith, and joining me for this episode from not the United States, but from the UK, is Richie Billing, fantasy author, former lawyer, fellow podcaster, and very busy man all over. Hello, Richie, and welcome to Book Lovers Companion.
Hello, Ida. Thank you very much for having me. It's wonderful to be here.
It's great to have you, and thank you so much for being so accommodating, because I asked you to change dates for our chat more than once. Sorry for that.
It's no problem at all.
I said you are from the United Kingdom. You are a former lawyer, a fantasy author, and a very busy man indeed. When you look at, or when I looked at your homepage, there's a lot you do about writing. That's your love, isn't it? Unlike being a lawyer, maybe.
Yeah, being a lawyer wasn't very much fun. I do like working in law, so I work in marketing now. Don't earn enough to be a full-time writer, unfortunately. But I'm in marketing now, and I do legal marketing, so I quite like that. Still in the law a little bit, but yeah, it's I much prefer creative things and writing and editing, which is how I got into marketing, and that's something I'm really interested in as well. But yeah, it's been a tough old journey. Been writing for about 11 years. Lots of high, lots of lows, few highs in between, but we don't do it. We do it for the love, really. It's something you're passionate about, and that's why I do a lot of the content on the website, is because I've got a lot of benefits from writing to mental health and well-being. I feel it's very therapeutic to do. I think a lot of people should be encouraged to do it. So that's why I share all the things I learn on my website, and if someone finds them and it helps them, then that's all good. It's great.
Absolutely agree. And I said before we started the recording, I've put up a scene with your latest novella, which came out in March 2025. And I would ask you to tell our listeners a little bit about this new labor of love.
Yeah, well, this is something I was very sort of passionate about, very delighted to share it with the world. And it's a story about a revolution against a corrupt government. So there's a lot of that at the moment, and I think a lot of people would like to do something similar. But it's where my frustrations came. It's where it came from is my frustrations with the world and the way it's going. And I wanted to write something that sort of help me feel a bit less despondent and a bit less helpless about what was happening. And I just wanted to do something different as well, something that wasn't really out there, and something that reflected what was happening now. It's easy to write something about dragons and wizards and stuff like that, and I wanted to do something different. So it's set in a fantasy world. There's not much of the fantasy elements in it until the very end, but it's very much a human story, and it's structured in a way where it's split into different parts, but each part tells a little piece of the larger story. It's a very simple story. It's just 24 hours, and it's the day of the revolution. And these parts and these characters are all from different walks of life, different backgrounds. And the idea of this is to critique the system that we live in, the worst parts of capitalism, and the exploitative sides, the corruptive sides, and do it from the perspective of like the police, doctors, drug dealers, children, And if you've ever seen The Wire, the TV show The Wire, then that's where the idea came from because it's one of the best things I've ever seen personally for its ability to critique something, an issue that affects so many people and show how it's evolved over time. So yeah, that's the story. Together We Rise. I've also introduced an extra feature which has never been done in a book before, I don't think, and that is incorporating an original soundtrack into it. And the way I've done this is because it's 8 parts. Each character has their own theme song, and this came as an idea from. Have you ever played Final Fantasy? Some characters would have their own theme songs. But I always love fantasy music. With Lord of the Rings, it just elevates the story to a whole new level. And I was like, well, why can't books have this feature as well? So with all this technology that's advanced now, I found something that was actually creating decent music. And I was like, oh, let's try it out and see if readers find it an interesting and a better experience. So that's another feature that the book has.
Oh, sounds intriguing. I think you're probably right. I know of no other book that has an original soundtrack. Maybe one, but it's a comic book. You
Yeah.
might have you might have heard it. Well, I know it because I listen to it every once in a while. The Life and Times of Scrooge McDuck, and a Finnish composer created a soundtrack for this book. It's really good.
That's amazing.
Yeah, it's you should listen to it. You should get it. It's really great. You said fantasy writing. I mean, the fantasy element comes at the end of this novella of yours. The teacup, my elusive co-host, who is more into tea at the moment, hence teacup. She always says that certain genres make it easier to deal with contemporary problems, like sci-fi. It's easier in sci-fi to deal with problems we have currently or ideas that are controversial, and maybe so is fantasy.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think part of the reason why I wanted to do this was for that very reason, is that people seem to respond differently when they think it's a story. And then at the end, or as they're going through, they're relating to it and think, oh, this is quite similar to what I see every day or something like that. And it struck me how much people do this probably last year. So in the UK, there was a TV show, and it's based on a true story, and it's about a scandal that happened with the post office in this country.
Yeah.
Yeah, you probably heard about it. It's called the Horizons Post Office Scandal. Well, basically, there was this piece of software which was made by a company called Horizon, and the post office, which was like the national postal service in the UK, they made all these like local post offices use this software. It's a really it's quite dull, as the stories go. But the worst part is that it was a flawed system, and it was telling supervisory staff that the postmasters who were in charge of the post office were stealing money, basically. So they ended up having to like pay hundreds of thousands of pounds back. They had to sell homes. Some people had committed suicide.
Yeah.
Some went to prison. And nothing was done about this for years. And then they made a TV show about it. It was like a documentary drama with like a few famous people in it.
Yeah.
And then everyone was like outraged.
Yeah.
They couldn't believe that this was happening, that like nothing was done. And it was only until after the TV show and all the sort of public outcry that something was actually done, which was like been on for 20, 30 years. So it's amazing just to see how people responded to that. And that wasn't really like a big step away. It was just like putting this story in a drama on a TV. So fantasy, yeah, it does. It's powerful. It has the ability to take something that we see a lot, we become desensitized to, and we can put a spin on it and remove people from that. To take people to something that's a bit more immersive, a bit more engaging. What do you think yourself?
I think so too, because when you enter a different world, different time, different place, it is easier to dwell and think about the problems, although they come from the real world, and you can get a different perspective. You can show both sides of the story. You can show the arguments. And sometimes it's even up to the reader or to the people in front of the TV. How would they solve the problem? I mean, it gets you thinking, doesn't it? More
Yeah,
so than it does sometimes in the real world, because when you hear about it, sometimes we gloss over it. We hear on the TV or release or on the radio or in the news, but to really engage with it, we don't, because how life is, how our daily lives are. But when you read in a book about these things, you get thinking. Also, like I said, when you watch on TV, I will always remember this one episode of Star Trek that encountered um these people who wouldn't allow a blood transfusion for their child. I mean, we all know what was really meant, and the
yeah.
arguments, and what are we going to do? What is the Star Trek crew going to do? Because Prime Directive and so on. But that was an interesting point of view, both sides actually.
That's
So
really clever.
yeah,
Yeah,
and it was an interesting it was an interesting idea to take something which is always controversial, like I said, in our world, and put it in a different world, in different place and time, and more or less talk about it and solve it or not solve it, because the solution in the end, what happened, yeah, I leave it up to you, the listeners. Watch it. It's worth watching, this episode especially. I can't really remember the title. It was I think it was Star Trek The Next Generation, but it was really good.
well, sounds good. I'll check that one out.
Yeah, absolutely. And Richie, fantasy, what is it? And why, well, in my estimation, is there this rise in popularity at the moment? Maybe I'm completely wrong. Correct me if I'm wrong. But what is fantasy, in your opinion? And what about the popularity?
I think it's probably one of the oldest genres. It might even be the oldest. It's just literally people sitting around the fire and making stuff up. Like, what is out there in the woods in the dark you can't see? What is it that's making those noises? And then you fill in the gaps. Like that's where the first sort of fantasy stories came from. And then the sort of that evolved into like folklore and mythology. And I love all of that. I just love mysteries. I love the possibilities as well. Like the ability to step outside your front door and go into the woods and find something that nobody's ever discovered before, or you know, what I mean, that's what fantasy is for me. It's like the adventure, it's the escapism, the ability to explore a new world with interesting characters, see different and exciting things, and it's pure freedom. And I think that's what I love. I'm very much someone who loves maximum freedoms in life. So pure freedom when it comes to writing is what you'd like. I mean, it's all well and good to write a crime story, but you could write a crime story in a fantasy world with trolls and goblins and stuff like that. So anything can happen in that world too. So I do like writing literary fiction as well. But I always end up bringing some kind of fantasy element into it, just to sort of mix things up a bit.
Yeah, why not? And maybe it's not just the fact that we like to make up stories. Maybe it's also the fact that in our technological world these days, there is still this element of thrill when we think of, like you said, the dark woods, where we
Mm,
don't know what might happen in the dark woods. And we do enjoy these stories, also the old stories about what happened back when your grandfather lived or your grandmother. And so maybe that's also an element why we or young adults enjoy it so much.
yeah, I think so. Yeah, I think we're always a bit intrigued. Doesn't matter how old you are, by something a bit weird and wonderful. Like, I mean, I find myself, I don't know, every now and then they pop up on social media, and it's just people going down like caves or mine shafts and stuff like that. And I find myself really engrossed by it because I'm so curious about what it is you could find. And I suppose that's what it's like when you pick up a fantasy book. It's like you, it's a whole new, like, unexplored cave. You don't know what you're gonna find, and it could be amazing. So
Huh.
that's what it's like. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, jumping down the rabbit hole.
Mm. Yeah.
Who doesn't want to be Alice and see what's there on the other end? Maybe.
Yeah.
The Jabberwocky and the Queen of Hearts, or maybe Frodo and whoever else. Yeah, true. And you said you can also incorporate other genres in fantasy. Absolutely. And there is a lot of other genres, or fantasy has subgenres. What kind of subgenres are there? Because I don't know next to nothing about fantasy, I have to admit. I mean, I do read fantasy novels, of course, but I'm not an expert. And
Yeah, I
I was
suppose.
intrigued to see, okay, these subgenres, how you define them. What can you tell us about those subgenres?
Yeah, so I suppose, like you mentioned before, about like this big rise in the popularity of fantasy, and the part of the reason why is because of this new subgenre called romantasy, which is just like all classic romance stories but put in a fantasy world. So a lot of people are loving that. There's a lot of really successful authors doing good things. Before that, there was a big push for epic fantasy, which was spurred on by Game of Thrones. So epic fantasy is more your grand worlds, maybe like big histories, a lot of characters, a lot going on. Then you've got more high fantasy, which is like Lord of the Rings, which is a bit more focused on the heroes who've generally got a quest, and the high fantasy elements like magic, monsters, things like that. I place myself more in the category like called grimdark, and probably more like dark fantasy with high fantasy elements. I don't know. You can just kind of you end up getting blended amongst different things. But yeah, grimdark is more gritty, realistic fantasy is the best way to put it. So characters are a bit more grey. There's no sort of clear heroes. Everyone's a bit like Breaking Bad Heisenberg style. Um, some of them are just like outright bad, like murderers, but are the main characters. And I mean, it's interesting. There's a lot of really good character-driven stories in the grimdark realm. And then that draws other things. There's like lots of really specific ones, like steampunk. So these will just be like stories set in like a steampunk world where like it's like Victorian era basically. And then you've got like urban fantasy where stories are just set in cities and towns, that kind of thing. There's a lot going on. And there's just even like more niche things. So like Together We Rise, you could even class as a political fantasy, which is another subgenre. um, So yeah, it's good though because that's why the reason why there's so many subgenres is because you are allowed this freedom, maximum freedom to explore and draw upon different genres and different types of stories.
Okay, so it is less hindered by rules than the fantasy genre than
Yeah,
other genres. Okay.
definitely.
Uh-huh. Interesting. Oh, interesting thought and interesting idea also to say, okay, you have all the freedom or more freedom than any other writer because when you write, I don't know, crime fiction, you more or less have to follow some kind of mod. Although there is also a lot of subgenres in crime fiction as well, but fantasy seems to have even more than that.
Yeah, because I suppose crimes, if you're writing a crime, a classic crime,
Yeah,
then you're bound by the constraints of our world.
yeah,
There's only so much you can really do.
yeah, yeah. That's true. Yeah, that's true. I mean, is steampunk fantasy? Yes, it is. Oh,
It's one of them. You could write a
mm-hmm.
steampunk, like modern day, well, not modern day, but like
Mm.
a normal world story. But
Yeah,
then there is like a lot of steampunk fantasy too.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah, I've read some good
yeah.
ones.
Okay. And I mean, you said there is much freedom in writing fantasy, and you don't have to follow any rules. But when you write fantasy, I mean, that's something one of and the authors said who writes sci-fi, for example. You have to be consistent in what you write, especially when you do world building, because that's a huge part of fantasy, isn't it? I mean, also with sci-fi, but more so, I suppose, with fantasy.
Yeah, and when I say there's no rules, I basically at the beginning there's no rules, and then you create the rules,
Mm.
and it's up to you how much you want to go into the detail of those like rules and guidelines. Like if you create a magic system,
Mm-hmm.
now people call like sometimes you get a hard magic system and a soft magic system. Now a soft magic system is where there's not very many rules. There's like
Mm-hmm.
basic guidelines to how things
Mm-hmm.
work.
Mm-hmm.
And whereas a hard magic system is where it's like hard and fast rules. Like you can't do this. There's a limit to everything. Set rules that people really like. Some people love this sort of regimented approach. Um, Now, personally, when it starts getting to that level, it becomes less like magic.
Mm.
Like magic
Okay.
is more in the sort of the unpredictability or the sort of unexplained aspect of it. And I think a good example is looking at Star Wars
Mm-hmm.
episodes 4, 5, and 6. Now the Force is quite like loosely defined. It feels like magic.
Mm-hmm.
Now in episodes 1, 2, and 3, they go and try and define what the Force is and start going on about like midi-chlorians and stuff like that. And it becomes less like magic and more like a science.
Mm-hmm.
So that is probably a good example of the two different approaches you can take. Some readers really like the sort of spontaneity of it and the less detail the better, but
Mm-hmm.
others like the hard and fast details. So it all comes down to what you like as a writer and what you want to do. Because if you hate rules, there's no point sitting there and going over like all the different limits and stuff for your magic system and your world. So it all comes down to you.
Ah, okay. And it was also interesting what you said about Star Wars. Do you think that's maybe that's one of the reasons why those hardcore fans are so put out by these episodes?
Yeah, I mean, I think 4, 5, and 6 were the best ones. Um, 1, 2, and 3, it was like let's just cash in. And then 7, 8, 9. was just taking the piss a bit with the cashing in. But I've watched like Rogue One
Mm-hmm.
and Andor, and I think they're brilliant.
Mm-hmm.
And I would say to any Star Wars fan, start with Andor, watch Rogue One, and then 4, 5, 6.
Okay.
Or anyone who's new to Star Wars, basically.
Okay. So
Because
maybe
that's the
the
Rebel, that's the story, the Rebel
okay.
Alliance, that's brilliant.
Okay, so that's for me then, because I have to admit I'm not that huge of a Star Wars fan. I've always been a Trekkie myself because that's what I did watch when I was at school. Star Trek.
Yeah, I know it's amazing. Yeah, Star Trek as well, but how vast it is. But I think for me, the Star Wars, it's like Lord of the Rings. It's like you can go and watch all these other stories about different people, but
Yeah.
like the story of the original Star Wars is it's about the people rising up against the corrupt
Hmm.
governments. It's together we rise, basically. And it's great. It's
Yeah.
set in space, and
Yeah.
we could relate a lot to the issues because it was just based on reality. And the story's brilliant. And Andor is like explains how the story began, basically. And then
Hmm.
Rogue One shows like this big turning point in the battle and the struggle.
Hmm.
And then
Hmm.
4, 5, and 6 tell the war, like the big battle,
Hmm.
basically plays out. And yeah, it's very well done.
Okay, good to know. Thanks for telling me that, because I spoke to a colleague few weeks ago, and he said Andor is good, and I said, okay, I will give it a chance, because what do I know about Star Wars? Nothing really much. So good to know that I should start with Andor. I will give it a try.
There you go.
Absolutely. Rising up against the establishment. What about? I mean, you've mentioned a Lord of the Rings. This is more the epic fantasy. You said George R. R. Martin is also epic, or Lord of the Rings is high fantasy. What about books like His Dark Materials? Where would you
I'd
put
say
that?
that's probably like high fantasy, but it's weird because it's like in our world, like Harry Potter.
Yeah?
So people class it as like low fantasy or high fantasy. It's like this is where the you get subgenres then that mix together
Yeah.
and create a new subgenre.
Yeah.
And that's great. It's like things are just like melding together and yeah, it's great. His Dark Materials is a very good story, and it's
Hmm.
interesting to see how he's taken our world and
Yeah.
made it unique.
Yeah. Absolutely. I would absolutely agree. And I mean, I spoke the other day with a regular on the show, and she does a lot of reviews, and she also has a podcast. And she said she wasn't usually that interested in fantasy, but when she gets a good one, so the plot is good, the character development is good. That's also
Mm.
something a fantasy writer has to take care of. Not just the plot, the story itself, but also the development of the characters. Is it done? Is it always done? Um, let's not say brilliantly, but good in the fantasy genre. Would you agree that authors also do have an eye on the characters, how they develop their characters, not just the world and the story they are telling?
Not all the time. So in Lord of the Rings, like Tolkien took more of like an omnipotence approach to telling the story, and like occasionally he would like zoom in a little bit more on a character, but most of the time it was just telling the story of all of the characters. In like more modern fantasy, it takes a different approach, and it's more zoomed in on character and specific characters and what they're going through. And I think that's probably one of the main things that George R. R. Martin did with Game of Thrones. He like introduced so many characters, and like watching how they interacted into play and
Mm.
how the stories interweave. People really love that and engage with it. And I think it is one of the main things that draw people to fantasy. And if you think you've got to write, sometimes these epic books are like 200,000 words long, and they might be like like part of series of books. So you could be talking like over 500,000 words that you're asking a reader to go through. So one of the main ways that you're going to keep them hooked is by creating characters that they love and that they connect with. And there are a lot of different brilliant characters out there in fantasy. I think one of the most popular one is created by Patrick Rothfuss, and the character is called Kvothe. I think he's called Kvothe, but like he's often known as Kote or Kote. And his series basically tells you're introduced to Kote as like he's as an adult and he's sort of retired. And then the series tells the story of his life as he recounts it to someone. So it's quite clever the way he's done it. But you gain a sort of deeper like not like attraction, but like a deep sort of fondness for this character, and you want to find out more. He's full of intrigue. It's really difficult to do, and you have to look on a, like almost like on a psychological level to see what ways you can like employ to get your readers to really love and like fall in love with your characters so much that they're going to follow them anywhere they go. It's amazing like what some writers have been able to do, and it's definitely one of the hardest parts of writing.
Yeah, I imagine. And well, what about the character itself? I mean, we said development, how you just gave us this example, how the story is told in retrospect. Someone narrates his life story. What about the villains and the heroes in fantasy? Because heroes can't be completely good. I mean, otherwise it will be boring, you know? And the villains can't be all bad because that'd also be yeah. So what about that in fantasy? How does fantasy cope with this questions or this question of make your characters interesting, give them flaws, let them have flaws, even if they are the heroes?
Yeah, it's interesting. Like a lot of classic fantasy, like Lord of the Rings, you get the bad guy and the villains, and they would be more evil because that was their role. They were just evil for evil's sake. And fantasy, there's one of the main reasons I love fantasy is because it is an exploration of what is good and what is evil. Why do people do good things? Why do people do bad things? And for me, I'm interested in the middle bit, like the people who do good things and they also do bad things. And this is what we're starting to see a lot more in the sort of modern day books. And it's one of the hardest things is with villains, especially, is making them compelling. And like you say, they can just be normal people with flaws. And with any kind of villain, you need to try and champion them as the hero of their own story.
Yeah.
Like, as far as they're concerned, they're dead right on what they should be doing. There's no doubt in their minds. They've been as wronged as the hero. And when you think of it like that, it's really fun to start writing a villain because they can be this sort of almost like they feel like fate has put them on this path almost, and they can do whatever they want, and it's quite liberating to write that as a writer. They can just do nasty things to people, and it's quite freeing. So it's always fun to play around with villains, and as long as you keep that in your mind, then because a character, your hero, is basically like if you strip it all back on a sort of a framework level, they're just trying to get or to achieve their goal, and the villain generally is the main force opposing it. So they're trying to. You've got one force pushing one way, you've got one force pushing the other way.
You spoke about the villain and the hero, those two parts in the story which are the protagonist, the antagonist. So is the villain maybe in fantasy the protagonist after all?
Yeah, that's something that you can like to play around with. Like in my first novel, Pariah's Lament, I introduced a villain about halfway through, and up to this point, he's been spoken about by other people who were opposed to him. So we're obviously led to believe that he's the bad guy and he's causing all of this. But halfway through the story, I introduced him as a main perspective, and you start to explore the reasons why. And it turns out that the the good guys, the heroes of like they've actually treated him really badly in the past, and he's perfectly justified. I mean, it may seem excessive starting a war, but there is a justification there for doing this. And I wanted to do that because I wanted to obviously show people that, like, not everyone, all the story is what you're led to believe, and people can be justified in what they do, even if they're led to, like, painted as the bad guys. And that a lot of the time, these like stupid wars that we see people waging all around the world are just down to like individuals' personal feelings, and it's stupid. It's really pathetic. So,
Unfortunately, yes, it is. And what you just said also reminds me a little bit of, maybe you know what I'm talking about, this TV show, Once Upon a Time.
no, I've not seen it.
Where the fairy tale characters end up in Maine,
Nice.
and it's a curse that put them there, and the evil queen is the mayor of the small town in Maine, and every character. I mean, it's not just fairy tale characters, because there is also Dr. Frankenstein and so on. So it's a bit a mishmash of different characters, but it's really good because, like you just said, in the end, it turns out it's not just that it's set in our time and in our world, but there's always also this going back to the old world, meaning fairy tale land, and having to deal with villains from there and so on. But also the character development is also interesting in this show, and it also shows that the reason why the evil queen was the evil queen was because of her past. It's not just she was born that way, she became the evil queen, and how they tell the story. And that makes it interesting, and also the fact that she has redeeming qualities as a character.
Yeah. No, yeah, it's a really good example. It just shows you what you can like to keep the readers hooked. There needs to be a change. The characters need to change for the better or the worse, but there needs to be some kind of change.
Yeah, exactly. And to like them all. And also, let's be honest here, usually the bad guys and the bad girls, they usually have the best lines.
Yeah.
They are usually funnier than the goody two shoes. Usually. just my humble opinion. And may I ask, Richie, you have it also on your website, writing tools and writing tips for people who want to be a fantasy author. What kind of tools are there? What tips can you give our listeners who want to become a fantasy author, maybe?
Yeah, so on the website you can find like writing tools like the fantasy name generator. Sometimes names are hard, so you can get free names. And then most of the tools are for like people who are looking to get stuff published. So there's like lists of magazines and journals and novel publishers as well. But if you're looking to get into writing fantasy, the main thing most authors that I've spoken to, from sort of like medium list authors to like best selling authors, they all start with the world. and try and think of an interesting concept by just asking, what if? So what if spiders could evolve to the size of humans and take over people's minds? Just like something stupid like that. But like once you start doing that, then you start getting these different ideas and concepts. And then it's about crafting a story around them. So thinking about like some of the things you mentioned about like characters. So thinking about interesting characters who need or want to get something important, and then thinking about things to stop them. They're the sort of main sort of things you need to think about at the beginning. And then it's just adding layers to the story. And when you're doing your first drafts, you don't need to know it all. You can discover, you can like identify areas where you need to go back and like do more research on. But when you're just writing and you're drafting your story, you don't need to worry about these things. Like you just literally, like I don't know if you've ever read any stories by Ian Rankin. He's a crime novelist, very, very good writer. And he says he just comes up with ideas. So like, um, he said he came up with the idea for a closed door murder involving three people, in a prison. Now he started writing the story without knowing how that happened, because he said for him, like part of the journey of writing the story is working out how it happened and how you can explain it. And sometimes when he's writing the story, he doesn't know the answers. So he just has to leave notes to go back and research things, go and speak to someone, find out more information. I think it's just the best way to write, because there's nothing stopping your creative process. Writing a story and editing a story are very different things. So just bear that in mind. Editing is where the real writing is done. It's where you sort of bring all the pieces together, make sure the jigsaw looks like a picture and not like a mishmash of oddities. And then when you're drafting, it's just all about getting all your ideas down on paper into some kind of loose structure, and then you just want to bring it all together. So they're my top tips for writing fantasy. If you're looking to give it a go, I wish you the best of luck. It's quite fun. It's fun, but it's tough.
And may I ask then how much planning goes into writing fantasy for you, for example, if at
For
all?
me, I do like to. It depends on the story. So if I was writing a novel, I'd have to plan that out.
Mhm.
Um, I plan things out as far as I think I need to. So
Mhm.
sometimes that's like 50%. Sometimes that's just 20%. Sometimes, like, if it's a complex idea, I think like I need to plan this out in quite a lot of detail. So I recently wrote a short story, and it was just like the only idea I had was a concept. It was
Mhm.
like, this is the point of the story that I want to explore. This is the vehicle. These are the
Mhm.
characters. This is the end. And then the
Mhm.
rest is just sort of made up on the way. I like that a lot, because it's
Mhm.
not, you don't create predictable stories.
Mhm.
But I do also sit down sometimes and I'll write things out in like point form. So it's like, this what happens, then this what happens, and this what happens. Kind of like the last two series of Game of Thrones, just plot points and
Okay.
nothing more. And then you've got to flesh out as a writer.
Okay.
Um,
So one could rightfully say that you're sort of a pantser.
I take a hybrid approach.
Okay.
I started off as a meticulous planner,
Okay.
and then I found that it wasn't doing the creative process much justice.
Okay.
So yeah, hybrid approach,
Mhm.
definitely.
Mhm. And what about the editing process? I mean, that's where the really hard work starts, isn't it?
Editing is tough, but you get better at it over time. I always recommend, if you're a new writer and you're editing something, look at your biggest problems first. So the big parts of the story, like the characters, what they want, um, the theme, and then start looking at like the sort of finer details, like the wording of things and the structure and dialogue. There's always stuff to learn, so never feel like you're satisfied that you know it all, because there's always going to be a day when you're going to get humbled and you learn that you don't know what foreshadowing is or something like that, or what passive voices.
Yeah. Do you work with an editor?
I do, yeah, for certain things. Like Together We Rise, I work with an editor, and like I am a copy editor now and day to day. That helps a lot. It's just about being able to detach yourself from your story. So if you can pick up your own story and not have any emotional connection with it and just think, I've got to edit this now, brutally and honestly, that's the biggest skill that you can teach yourself.
Yeah. Is it also hard in the fantasy genre, this question of how much to tell, or not at all?
Yeah.
Because it is.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So a lot of writers, they commit a crime called info dumping, where it's like they just think that in order for the reader to understand what the significance of this part of the story is, or what this object is, or what this wizard does, they need to just dump a load of information like backstory and fluff, like just waffle basically, that you don't need to know. It's one of the reasons why Together We Rise, I wanted to write a novella, because I really did not want to write a novel, because you have to put all of this extra stuff in, and it is just fluff. It's unnecessary weight. And there are ways you can do it, like quite skillfully, to give the reader enough to explain all of the backstory and all of the other little bits of details without having to dump it all in and add like 10, 20,000 words to your story.
Okay. Yeah. Same for everyone then.
It's a tough one in fantasy, because you spend so much time creating your world and all these different magic systems and details. You just get excited about telling everyone about them.
Yeah. And then it's actually too much, isn't it? Yeah.
Less is always more.
Yeah. Yeah, understandable. And Richie, what are your plans? What can your fans expect from you?
So at the moment, I'm working on an online web novel. So just bringing out like a new chapter every week. But I'm writing this in a sort of novelette format. So it's part of like an ongoing series about a group of useless monster hunters. And they live in a world where there's more monsters than humans. And there's this sort of bounty contract system being established where people in like local towns and mayors and stuff like that create contracts. So these crews of monster hunters go around to try and get the bounties by slaying monsters and trapping monsters. So it's more of like a classic fantasy, but like spinning the sort of obvious tropes that like the heroes save the day. In the story, the heroes are really incompetent and useless, but they're quite funny and entertaining.
Okay.
So I've brought out the first part, which is called The Drake, and that is about the first contract as a new crew after they've broken away from a really successful crew. And a drake is like a type of dragon. So they're trying to kill that on the first job. And the second part I'm writing now, I treat them as like episodes of a sitcom. So you get like regular chapters as part of each episode, and then there'll be a little bit of a break as I write the next episode, and then the next one will come out.
Okay.
So
intriguing.
You can read all that on Patreon if you want to go over there and check it out.
Yeah, well, good to know. Yeah. And Richie, is there anything else you would like our listeners to know?
Well, if you like writing fantasy and you want to learn more, I do have a podcast as well called the Fantasy Writers Toolshed. Lots of different best-selling authors on there, all with a focus on fantasy, and then some interesting guests as well. Like I had a Norse shaman on recently for a bit of talk on spirituality and religion, and also a former FBI special agent who's a world-renowned expert in body language. So that's always good. Good body language details to add to your story. Lots of good information there. So yeah, that's another destination you can check out if you're looking to learn a bit more.
Yeah, absolutely. Great, thank you. Richie, it was an absolute pleasure talking to you, and I learned quite a lot about fantasy.
Thank you very much, Edith. And thank you very much for having me. It was really lovely chatting with you tonight. It was an absolute pleasure.
The same here. And please wait for me in the green room. I will be with you shortly. Dear listeners, I do hope you enjoyed this episode as much as my guest and I did. Please don't forget to like and subscribe. And I do hope you will tune in for another episode. Until next time.